This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the very long and very impressive catalogue from one of the most celebrated, decorated, respected, and iconic bass players of all time. And ever since I started this review series over a year ago, I have been dropping little subtle hints here and there that I would be covering this musician in particular and his entire catalogue of recordings as a band leader. And that moment has now finally arrived. And in my opinion, he is one of the true masters of the acoustic and electric bass. And when you hear him, you know straight away who it is because he has a very unique sound on both instruments. And he's my favorite bass player of all time. And he's seen it all, he's done it all, and collaborated with just about everyone. He's the guy that everybody wants in their band. And what more can you say? He is one of the greatest of all time. And the gentleman I am talking about is, of course, a man that needs no introduction whatsoever. The one and only John Patitucci. And the first time that I became aware of John Patitucci was on two occasions. The first time I heard of John Patitucci was on my dad's vinyl, GRP Super Live in concert, and the Electric Band were playing a track from their self-titled album called No Zone. And John Patitucci had an extended bass solo, and it just blew my mind. I had never heard anyone play acoustic bass like that because I always knew the acoustic upright bass as being an instrument that was always in the background, never up front. So to actually hear John Patitucci playing that's just changed my view and perspective on how the acoustic bass could be in a band, that acoustic bass could be a lead instrument just like the saxophone or piano or the guitar. And his technique, his speed, everything about him, the sound he generated just completely took my breath away. It was just an unbelievable moment. And the second time I became aware of John Patitucci was on my dad's VHS video that he recorded of a live concert of the Chick Corea Elektric Band live in Germany from 1987, which was featured on the German channel Freesat. And John Patitucci played an extended bass solo on electric bass, and his speed on that just blew my mind, just like he did on the acoustic bass playing he done on the No Zone track with the Electric Band. And I was just completely blown away. I thought, wow, this guy is not only highly versatile on acoustic bass, but he's also very highly versatile on electric bass as well. And from that moment on, I became a loyal fan of John Patitucci. And since bursting onto the scene in the mid 80s, John Patitucci has collaborated and played with just about everyone from Steve Kahn to Larry Carlton to Adam Rogers to Wolfgang Musville to Lee Ritzner to Radko Jaka. He was a member of the legendary Michael Brecker's Quindicate. He has played with the GRP All Star Big Band. He is currently a member of the Children of the Light trio with pianist Dinello Perez and drummer Brian Blade from the Wayne Shorter Quartet. He has also played with Eddie Daniels, Victor Feldman, Stan Getz, Antonio Sanchez, Joe Lovano, Chris Potter, John Schofield, Mike Stern, Wynton Marsalis, Joey Calderazzo. He has also been one half of some of the most iconic and well-known rhythm sections and has collaborated very closely with a number of drummers from Brian Blade to Vinnie Colaiuta to Jack DeJohnette to Dave Weckl, and he has also collaborated very closely with electric bandmates like Dave Weckl, as I mentioned, Eric Merenthal and Frank Gambale, and of course he was a member of the legendary Wayne Shorter Quartet for well over 20 plus years. And of course, how can we forget, he was the main collaborator for the legendary Chick Corea and was a member of the Chick Corea Electric Band the Chick Corea Acoustic Band, and the Chick Corea Quartet. And we are going to be taking a look at the very impressive catalogue of John Patitucci, which is a total of 15 recordings as a band leader. And out of all of the Electric Band members, I find John Patitucci's catalogue to be the most diverse because every album is very different, very unique. They don't all sound the same, they all sound very different. And John Patitucci is constantly always reinventing himself. He never does the same album twice. And he's dabbled in all genres from jazz to fusion to blues to chamber to classical to avant garde and more, and even Brazilian, African, and bossa nova. He's incorporated so many different influences in his music. And with the other Electric Band members, like Dave Weckl and Frank Gambale, their music is more fusion driven. Eric Marienthal's catalogue of music is more very light, laid back, and leaning more towards the smooth jazz pop sort of approach of music. But with John Patitucci's music, it's all very different. And as I said, all of his albums sound very different to the last. And there are no bad albums in this catalogue. Some albums are better than others, but by and large, you will not find any bad album in this catalogue. So we are going to start with the first album, which came out in 1988, and this is his self-titled debut recording for GRP Records, John Patitucci. Now, the album cover, of course, is very 80s, but I wouldn't let that fool you because this features some of John Patitucci's best playing and composing, and he's really showcased to the fullest. And we've got some very big heavy hitters on this album: Chick Corea, Michael Brecker, Peter Erskine, Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, John Beasley, David Whitten, and Rick Risso. Some big names there. And all of the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci, with the exception of one composition with himself and Chick Corea, and one Chick Corea penned composition. But this album, to me, is just incredible. And it doesn't sound like anything you've ever heard before. It's not really your typical funky sort of Electric Band album. It's got so many different styles, and the music is very accessible and very enjoyable. And John Patitucci just all over this album, and he's got a very unique sound on both the acoustic and the electric bass. Yeah, it's the 80s, but the music's just unbelievable. So we've got Growing, Wind Sprint, Searching, Finding, Buyer, Bio, Change of Season. Now, here's an interesting fact about this track, Change of Season. The Electric Band always used to play this live, and it just sounded dynamite. But the original version is just very laid back, very beautiful, but at the same time, it's still very good. But I highly recommend you check out the Electric Band version. It's just dynamite. Our Family, Peace and Quiet Time, Crestline, Zaragoza, and we got 3 bonus tracks: Then and Now, Colleen, and Review. Great stuff here. Standout tracks for me are Growing, which is kind of similar to what Lee Ritenour was doing, that sort of sound. Wind Sprint, Searching, Finding. Bio's got some great drum work from Vinnie Colaiuta, especially at the end where he just goes absolutely nuts. Change of Season, Our Family, Peace and Quiet Time, Zaragoza. Then and Now has just got an unbelievable Michael Brecker sax solo, and Colleen, which is kind of very similar to the acoustic band sort of style of music with Chick Corea on piano and Peter Erskine. It's just really, really good. And Zaragoza, very similar to the Electric Band, and it's got that kind of sound that goes and it's got some great acoustic bass playing from John Patitucci, and he also bows on it as well. Lead arco, just not something you see much. He goes like it's just unbelievable. Those are the standout tracks for me. And then we got the credits, and as you can see, we got Young John with Chick. So If you was ever looking to start listening to John Patitucci's music, this is the one to start with. Great album, great production, great compositions, great playing from everybody involved. And, you know, the interesting thing about it is there's no guitar, which is fine because I'm a fan of the bass. And I thought if I want to hear a bass player's album, this does exactly what it says on the tin. You know, if I want to hear saxophone, I'll go and listen to a sax album. This has got lots of great bass playing, and you will not be disappointed if you're a fan of great bass playing or you're just a fan of great music. So there you have it, the self-titled debut album of John Patitucci. Great place to start. So as we move along to the next album, which came out in 1989, and this is a follow-up to the self-titled On the Corner. So again, this is a follow-up to the first album, and this features Chick Corea, Michael Brecker, Al Foster, Kirk Whalum, David Whittam, John Beasley, Dave Weckl, Alex Acuna, Vinnie Colaiuta, Judd Miller, Paul Jackson Jr., Eric Marienthal, Rick Russo, Howard McCary, Phyllis St. James, and Alfie Silas. So some big names on there. And this time, all the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci and doesn't miss a beat. A great follow up. Some more different styles incorporated. There's a bit of reggae, a bit of fusion, a bit of straight ahead jazz. You know, there's a bit of everything going on here. And as I said, the first album, I'd say, is kind of what a continuation of the Electric Band. Here, it's just a bit of everything, and it's great stuff here. There's Brazilian, there's some African elements. It's all there. So let's have a look. Here we are. Standout tracks for me are the title track On the Corner, which features Judd Miller on EVI. Venetian Moonlight, just beautiful. Al Foster doing his cymbal work, David Whittam providing the atmospheric sounds on the keyboards, Chick Corea amazing as always on the piano, and John Patitucci just up front on the electric bass. A Better Mousetrap, which is a kind of like a duo jam track with himself and Dave Weckl and Jay Oliver playing percussion sequencing. Interesting enough, Jay Oliver's not actually credited on this album, but yet he's credited on this track. Strange. And John Patitucci's just overdubbed on like half a dozen basses, and it's just incredible. Painting, another beautiful track. John Patitucci on acoustic bass, Judd Miller providing a harmonica sound on the EVI. Brilliant stuff. Very beautiful. Flatbush Avenue is just fusion ecstasy. It's just great drum work from Dave Weckl, dirty bass playing from John Patitucci. It's just great stuff. And then we got the two bonus tracks, which are two of my favourites. The Storyteller with Michael Brecker. Beautiful track, but I just have one problem with it. It ends too soon. My God. You know, you have like John Patitucci's acoustic bass playing at the end, and you got the haunting synth work, and it just fades out. Why would you do that? I want to hear more. Should have been longer. Should have been like maybe 9 minutes or so, so we could just get the whole thing. What can you do? But still great. Great playing from Michael Brecker as always. And we got Bertha's Bop, which is kind of very similar to the style of the acoustic band, which features the legendary Al Foster on drums. So you got two legends, Chick Corea and Al Foster, and you know John Patitucci. I would probably consider him as a legend as well. And another favourite track of mine on here is Avenue D with Michael Brecker and Vinnie Colaiuta. It's just very similar to the Electric Band, but a little bit more ferocious and more bestial and animalistic. And Colaiuta and Brecker just decimate this track. And there's some more credits. But yeah, On the Corner, really good album and a nice follow up to the self-titled. So there you go, On the Corner. Nice. So as we move along, we come to the next album. This came out in 1990, and this is Sketchbook. Now, John Patitucci changed his sound here. Originally, he was playing the Ken Smith Jackson bass, and here he switches to Yamaha, and this would pretty much define his overall sound for most of his career, or at least this portion of his career. And unlike the first two albums, which were a little bit more on the fusion side, very similar to the style of the Electric Band, here a lot more influences here. So we've got some Brazilian, some classical, some chamber, bit of fusion. You know, it's all still there, but it's a little bit more diverse than the first two albums. So we've got Michael Brecker, John Scofield, Peter Erskine, Vinnie Colaiuta, Terry Lynn Carrington, Alex Acuna, John Beasley, David Whitten, John Cross, Dori Kayami, Ricardo Silveira, Paulino Di Costa, and Judd Miller. It's a really good album, this is. Some outstanding tracks, and it's just got a bit of everything on here. So we've got Spaceships, Joab, If You Don't Mind, Scofile, Greatest Gift, From a Rainy Night, Junkman, Two Worlds, Backwoods, They Heard It Twice, Train, and Through the Clouds. Now, most of the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci, and there's one by John Beasley, a co-composition with John Beasley, one by David Whitten, and you know, it's a good album. The standout tracks for me are Greatest Gift, From a Rainy Night, Two Worlds. Now, Two Worlds is kind of like a classical chamber sort of track. It's got John Patitucci on like overdubbed arco acoustic bass, bowed, and got Alex Acuna provided the percussion, and you got David Whitten and John Beasley creating this orchestral, atmospheric sound with the keyboards, and you just got Michael Brecker just wailing away, and it's very similar to Michael Brecker's collaboration with Klaus Ogerman on Cityscapes. It's just really out there and very spacey, very dark, very atmospheric, and you know, it really shows you that John Patitucci isn't afraid of taking risks and trying different things, and he does this here. Backwoods is John Patitucci on solo acoustic bass, which would be a highlight of many of his albums. You always get like one or two acoustic solo bass tracks. Train with Michael Brecker and Terry Lynn Carrington, just like in the name. It's a tribute to John Coltrane, and again, great bass work from John Patitucci. Now, the track here, Junkman, I would say is the weakest of the whole album. Just sounds like Ghostbusters. It's a funny track. It sounds like Ghostbusters goes electric, and yeah, it's a funny track. It's not my favourite, but it's a good laugh. I think it's quite a funny track. But those are the standout tracks for me, and of course, the two tracks with John Scofield is just Patitucci and Scofield just absolutely shredding it up together on electric guitar and bass. So Scofield and They Heard It Twice, just down and dirty with Scofield and Patitucci. Great stuff here. So there you have it. Sketchbook. Great follow up to the first two. As I said, very different, but at the same time, very enjoyable. There you have it. So as we move along to the next album, which came out in 1992, this was a very big departure from the first three albums. The first three albums were more fusion with elements of jazz and other stuff, but here John Patitucci takes a complete plunge into the world of classical chamber music, and this is Heart of the Bass. So, as I said, this album is more of a classical album than a jazz album, and it's just absolutely beautiful. This is one of my favourite John Patitucci albums, and it really shows you that John Patitucci's chops are much more bigger and confined not just to the fusion jazz world, but he shows that he's very versatile in all styles. So we got the three-part suite Concerto for Jazz, Bass and Orchestra, Concerto Movement 1, Westward Expansion, Concerto Movement 2, After the Storm, Concerto Movement 3, Mardi Gras, and then we got the solo electric bass track Heart of the Bass, which is the title track, Four Hands, which is a duo track with himself and Chick Corea, which is John Patitucci on electric bass and Chick Corea providing synthesized strings on his keyboards. And then we got Mulligan, we got Bach Prelude in G major from the cello suite, and then we got John Patitucci's take on the children's songs of Chick Corea, which is called Miniatures for Solo Bass Piano and String Orchestra. So we got Miniature 1, Ivory Tower, Miniature 2, Lonely People, Miniature 3, Still Life, Miniature 4, Marionette, Miniature 6, Butterfly, and then we got Miniature 5, Vision. Just a beautiful, gorgeous album. If you like classical music, this is the one for you. And I don't think many bass players have done a concerto for bass and orchestra, not to my knowledge anyway, but just an amazing recording. So let's have a look. There we are. The concerto for jazz, bass, and orchestra was composed by Jeff Bill. Heart of the Bass, composed by John Patitucci. Four Hands, co-composed by Chick Corea and John Patitucci. Mulligan, composed by John Patitucci. And the Miniatures for solo bass, piano, and string quartet, composed by Chick Corea. What can you say, really? It's just... There we are. Good stuff here. And then we got sleeve notes about how this concept album came to be. So the standout tracks for me are the Concerto for Jazz, Bass and Orchestra. I love all three parts, but I would say parts 1 and 2 are the standouts for me. Westward Expansion and After the Storm. The title track, Heart of the Bass, is just beautiful. Mulligan on acoustic bass, just beautiful, and Bach Prelude in G major, which is John Patitucci on electric bass, just mind blowing, really good. But all of it's good. This is one of those albums you'd have to listen to fully appreciate the skill and technique of John Patitucci. So there you have it, Heart of the Bass, one of my favourite John Patitucci albums of all time. Certainly one of the best classical albums I've heard. So as we move along, we come to the next album, and this came out in 1993. And again, a very different kind of album. And this is Another World. So the album cover, as you can see, is very African influenced, and there's a lot of African influence in this recording. So we've got Alex Acuna, Jeff Bill, John Beasley, Michael Brecker, Louis Conti, William Kennedy from the Yellow Jackets, Andy Narell, Armand Sabal Lecco, who is the second bass player, Steve Tavoloni, and of course, longtime friend and bandmate from the Electric and Acoustic Band, Dave Weckl. Brilliant album this is. So all of the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci, with the exception of 2 co-efforts and 1 by John Beasley. So it's a good album. So we've got Ivory Coast Parts 1 and 2, Another World, My Summer Vacation, Soho Steel, I Saw You, Hold That Fort, Norwegian Sun, Vigirot, Showtime, Peace Prayer, Shanachi, and Until Then. Just beautiful albums, some great tracks on here. Standout tracks for me are Ivory Coast Parts 1 and 2, My Summer Vacation, I Saw You, I love Showtime. Peace Prayer is just the most beautiful track of the entire album. It's very Jaco Pastorius, you know. It's John Patitucci on electric bass and Alex Acuna and Louis Conti providing percussion. It's just beautiful beyond words. Really classic electric bass at its very best. And then Until Then, which is the only track John Patitucci doesn't play on, but he composed it, and this features John Beasley on keyboards and piano. It's a very new ageish track, very similar to what you'd hear from Windham Hill, but great stuff here. Really good album this is, and I've listened to this quite a lot. So there you have it, Another World. Great album. So as we move along, we come to the next album, which came out in 1985, and this is Mistra Weiner. So this is more of a Brazilian sort of project. There's lots of Brazilian vocals on this, but there's some great tracks as well. I mean, I'm not really a fan of the vocals. I'd much rather hear the bass, but there's some good playing on here. There's some great songs on here. So we got Alex Acuna, John Beasley, Joe Bosco, Dori Kami, Peter Erskine, Kevin Letou, Ivan Lins, Armand Sabaleko, Steve Tavoloni, and Dave Weckl. It's a good fun album this is. And this would be his last album for GRP because he would move to Concord Music just about a few years later. So we got the title track, Mistra Weiner, Bates Balio, Puccini, Samba Novo, The Four Loves, Azim Naoda, Joys and Sorrows, Aguma Ugra, Soul Song, Varadirio, Long Story, Bara Datikchucha, and Samba School. So some bit of a mouthful with the titles, but they're all in Brazilian, but it's good. Standout tracks for me are Samba School, which is John Patitucci on solo electric bass, Long Story on with John Patitucci on solo acoustic bass, Joys and Sorrows, it's just fusion classic. It's a lovely song this is. Soul Song's beautiful. Agra, which is Water Mother Water, love that. Great bass work from Patitucci. And this one's good. Puccini with Dave Weckl on drums. Beautiful album. Really good album this is. But as I said, I'm not really a great fan of the Brazilian vocals, but it's still a good album. It's not a clunker, but some outstanding tracks and some great playing. And all the compositions are composed by John Patitucci, but there's a couple of tracks that are composed by Júlio Bosco. But just good stuff this is. So after that, John Patitucci will move from GRP to Concord Music, and the next album would come out in 1987, and this is One More Angel. Again, this is very different to his first five. Much more of a jazzy, laid-back chamber sort of sound, but this is a really good album. So this album features Alan Pasqua on piano, Paul Motion on drums. We've got sax titans Michael Brecker and Chris Potter, his brother Thomas on acoustic, wife Sashi on cello, and longtime friends Steve Tavoloni on soprano saxophone and John Beasley on piano and keyboards. A really good album this is. Some great playing from Patitucci. There we are. There's all the sleeve notes. So we've got Quasimodo, Arrival, On the Hudson, Sashi's Eyes, San Michel, One More Angel, Romance, Snowbound, Notre Dame Cathedral, and Beloved. It's a beautiful album this is. So the standout tracks for me are Quasimodo, Arrival, which has Michael Brecker playing beautifully as always, On the Hudson, Sashi's Eyes, San Michel, which was composed by Alan Pasqua, and we've got One More Angel, which is beautiful, and Beloved, which doesn't feature John Patitucci, but it features Steve Tavoloni and John Beasley. Very, very beautiful and quite dark and atmospheric. But One More Angel is a really good album. As I said, it's different. It's not really a fusion album. It's more like a classical album, more like a chamber sort of recording. So there you have it. One More Angel. Great way to start his career with the Concord music label, and some lovely compositions from John Patitucci and great playing from Patitucci himself, Brecker, and Paul Motion, and Chris Potter. It's a really good album. So we move to the next album, and this came out in 1988, and this is Now. Now, I'm on the fence with this album. It's a good album, but I find this album to be a little bit weak compared to the others. That doesn't necessarily mean that this album's bad. It's good. It's more towards avant-garde. but I don't think Patitucci, Potter, and Schofield, I don't think they work well together musically. I mean, they're great players, don't get me wrong. I don't know really, just this album's very up and down. There's some great tracks, there's some great playing, but at the same time, there's some tracks that are just kind of like hit and miss for me. I find that there's too much of Schofield and Potter, and there's not enough of John Patitucci. I mean, John Patitucci gets some great bass solos in, but at the same time, I don't feel he's featured enough. I feel like he's kind of in the background while the others are more at the front. But this doesn't take away from the fact that this is still a good album. But I don't know really. I've listened to it a few times. I'm starting to slowly warm up to it. It's not as bad as I remembered, but at the same time, I don't know really. It's just there's some tracks I like and there's some tracks I don't. Just there's not enough balls to it. So we see this album's more of a quartet recording, and there's some trio tracks as well. So this features Michael Brecker, Chris Potter, John Schofield, and Bill Stewart. Now, John Schofield and Bill Stewart are no strangers to each other. They've been playing together for what seems like forever. So they work well together. Michael Brecker, he just sounds great in every situation. Chris Potter, at this point, he was one of the young hotshots of the saxophone. And I would have liked to have seen a track with Brecker and Potter together. I think that would have been a really fun track. But I don't know, really. Just I find some of the compositions are not as engaging as his earlier compositions he done. But there's some good tracks on here as well. So we got the title track now, Grace, Out of the Mouths of Babes, Hope, Labour Day, Espresso, Forgotten but Not Gone, Search for Peace, which is a standard, which was originally composed by McCoy Tyner, Giant Steps, what more can you say really? It's John Coltrane, can't go wrong, and Maya. So let's have a look. There he is. Oh, a lovely picture of John Patitucci and his baby and missus. There's the credits. As I said, I've been listening to this a few times now and I'm starting to warm up to it, but at the same time, it's not my favourite John Patitucci album, but there is some good tracks. The standout tracks for me are Hope with Michael Brecker and Labour Day with Michael Brecker. You can't go wrong with Brecker, really. Espresso's good, which has got a great drum solo intro by Bill Stewart. Search for Peace, which is a trio track with Schofield and Stewart. That's a great track too. Giant Steps, which is a bass and drum duo track. Love it. Just Bill Stewart going nuts on the drums and John Patitucci playing electric bass. And Maya, which is a solo bass showcase track with just John Patitucci on solo electric bass. It was absolutely beautiful as well. But as I said, not my favourite John Patitucci album, but I'm slowly starting to warm up to it. Slowly. I'd probably say this is the weakest of the albums, but I wouldn't say it's bad. Just as I said at the beginning, there are just some albums that are a little bit better than others. So there you have it now. As I said, I don't dislike this album. It's just there's some albums I like just a little bit more, but still worth checking out. And there's still some great tracks and there's some great playing from Patitucci. So there you have it now. So we move to the next album, and this came out in 2000, and this is Imprints. Very enjoyable album. I haven't heard this in a while, but I went back and listened to it not too long ago, and I forgot how good this was. So we got John Patitucci, we got John Beasley, Jack DeJohnette, Horatio El Negrego Hernandez, Giovanni Hidalgo, Dinello Perez, Chris Potter, Mark Turner, one of my guys, and his wife Sashi as well. So it's a good album. I forgot how good this was. Haven't heard it in a while, but very enjoyable. So tracks we've got here are King Kong, Postcard, Little Steps, Joan, Maroon Bells, the title track Imprints, The Well, Essay, Japanese Folk Song, and Afro Blue. Folk Song and Afro Blue. It's a good collection of songs here, highly enjoyable. As I said, I forgot how good this album actually was. It's very Brazilian, African sort of influenced album. So, you can hear the influence throughout the music. So, standout tracks for me are Little Steps with Chris Potter and Mark Turner. I'm not normally a fan of two sax players together, but these two sound dynamite. Joan, the title track Imprints, which is the longest track, which is like 11 minutes long, really good track. The Well, which is just John Patitucci's most beautiful composition, or one of his most beautiful compositions. Japanese folk song, which is a duo track with himself and John Beasley, acoustic bass and piano. And we've got Afro Blue with Giovanni Heidigalgo on percussion and congas. Really, really good. So all of the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci, with the exception of one track, Afro Blue, which was written by Mongo Santa Maria. Really good fun track, and those are the standout tracks for me, in my opinion. But it's a really good fun album. Like I said, I forgot how good Imprints was. So there you have it, John Patitucci, Imprints. Good album, worth checking out. So we moved to the next album, and this is one of my favorites. And this came out in 2001, and this is Communion. So Communion kind of like continues the trends of African, Brazilian sort of influences. But again, as I said, every John Patitucci album is different, especially with the tracks. They don't all sound the same. So he's completely moved away from fusion. He's more playing like straight jazz, but there's still some of the classic John Patitucci sound that we all know and love. So the musicians we got on here are Joe Lovano, Branford Marsalis, Chris Potter, Tim Rees, Luciana Souza, Bruce Bath, Brad Mildew, Ed Simon, Brian Blade, Horatio El Negrego Hernandez, Mark Quinones, Duduca da Fonske, Valtinho Anastasio, Richard Wood, Elizabeth Lim Dutton, Lawrence Dutton, and Sashi as well. Big names on here. So we've got Baraluk, Calabri, Corioluco, Isabella, the title track Communion, Mysterioso, Valentine, The Sower, Soul Eyes, Bohemia, After Dark. Really good collection of songs and some of my favourite compositions from John Patitucci. So there's some credits there, some sleeve notes. There we are. And there's the man himself. Great stuff. So standout tracks for me are Isabella, Communion, which has got gorgeous soprano playing from Branford Marsalis. We've also got here Valentine, Soul Eyes, which is a electric bass and piano duet with himself and Brad Mildew. You can't go wrong with Brad Mildew. He just sounds great in every situation. And Calabria with Joe Lovano, and Bohemia After Dark, which is a solo bass track with John Patitucci. Some really good compositions on here, and some favourite tracks of mine as well. So there you have it, Communion, another favourite album of mine, and one that I often listen to this day. Really good album. So we move to the next album, and this came out in 2003, and this is a really good album. This was actually the first John Patitucci album I ever bought, and this is Songs, Stories, and Spirituals. So John Patitucci explains here that music's used for storytelling, and he's right. Whenever we watch a movie or we listen to audio play or we watch a TV show, the music is always an important part of films and storytelling. And here it just kind of like conveys that sort of idea that music is always used for telling a memorable story. So it's a really good, beautiful album. It's one of the most laid back albums of his entire catalogue. And as I said, it's more jazz and chamber sort of driven kind of music. So we got John Patitucci, we got Brian Blade, Ed Simon, Elizabeth Lim Dutton, John Thomas, Lawrence Dutton, Lucien Souza, Richard Wood, Sashi, Tim Rees, and his brother Tom on acoustic guitar. So it's a really lovely album. This is a very lovely album, and Lucien Souza just sounds beautiful with her vocals. So we got Tall Tale, Chovendo na Rosaria, I Will Rise, Lee, In the Bleak Midwinter, Three Faces, Now the River, Soulmate, Rhapsodic Journey, It's Never Entered My Mind, Love Eternal, Wise One. Really good album this is. Standout tracks for me are Tall Tale, Chorindo, Na Rosora, Lee, Three Faces, Soulmate, Love Eternal, It's Never Entered My Mind, and Wise One, which is like a duo drum and bass with Brian Blade and John Patitucci. But it's a really good, beautiful album. Lovely album. Some sleeve notes. The guys who play on the album. Lovely album. It's a very, very good album. This is. So there you have it. Songs, Stories and Spirituals. Very good album. Probably the most laid back album of the entire catalogue. So as we move along, we come to the next album. This came out in 2006, and this is another favourite album of mine, Line by Line. So this is, the core of this album is a trio with John Patitucci, Adam Rogers and Brian Blade, with some guest appearances from Chris Potter and a string orchestra, and an additional bass player as well. So it's a really good album this is. So we've got The Root, Agato, Circular, Folklore, Dry September, Nana, Theme and Variations for Six-String Bass and Strings, Line by Line, Evidence, Jesus is on the Main Line, Incarnation, Soaring, Tone Poem. Lovely album. Another favourite of mine. So the who plays on what? There's John Patitucci and there's some credits. So all of the compositions are written and composed by John Patitucci, with the exception of one by Adam Rogers, a standard by Thelonious Monk, and one by Manuel de Falla. So standout tracks for me are The Roots, Agatio, Circular, Folklore, Dry September, Nano, which is a duo piece with John Patitucci and Adam Rogers. Personally, I think I'd love to sing a whole album, just those two. Theme and Variations for Six-String Bass and Strings, Evidence, Jesus is on the Main Line, which is a solo acoustic track, and Tone Poem, which is like a solo electric bass track. So those are standout tracks for me, but it's a really good album from start to finish. It's got a bit of jazz, got a bit of classical, got a bit of blues, got a bit of funk, got a bit of fusion. It's got a bit of everything here. So it's a really good album, this is. So there you have it, Line by Line. One of my favourites. So the next album would come out in 2009, and this is Remembrance. So this is the John Patitucci trio with John Patitucci, Joe Lovano and Brian Blade, with some guest appearances from his wife Sashi Patitucci and Rogerio Boccato on percussion. This album is not as bad as I remembered. I mean, I'd probably say this is another weak album, but there's some good tracks. I'm not discounting the musicianship and playing of Joe Lovano and Brian Blade and John Patitucci, but I just don't think, I don't know really, a sax trio. I love the sax trio, depending on who the guys are, but I just don't know really. I just find this collaboration, I don't know really. I just don't think they work as well together as I thought, but there's some good playing and there's some great tracks on here. So we've got Monk Train, Messiaen's Gumbo, Sunnyside, Meditations, Marley, Scenes from an Opera, Blues for Freddie, Safari, Joe Henn, Playball, Remembrance. So this is kind of like a tribute to all the greats and all the jazz legends as well. So let's have a look. There's some sleeve notes there. Who plays on what? Some more credits. And there's the guys. So the standout tracks for me are Remembrance for Michael Brecker, which has got John Patitucci overdubbed on piccolo bass and electric bass. We got Scenes from an Opera, which is an acoustic bass and arco bass melody, and we got Sashi providing cello overdubbed, and Joe Lovano on alto clarinet, and Messiaen's Gumbo's great track as well, and Meditations and Marley, another great track. So it's kind of half and half with this album. There's some good tracks, there's some tracks that are not so great, and there's some tracks that are just pretty normal, but there's some good playing on here, there's some good songs. So there you have it, John Patitucci Trio, Remembrance. I'd probably say this is another weak one in the catalogue, but that doesn't mean it's bad, it's just, I don't know really, it just doesn't quite do it for me. But John Patitucci would come back with a bang on the next album, which came out in 2015, and this is Brooklyn. So this is the John Patitucci Electric Guitar Quartet with Adam Rogers, Steve Cardenas, and Brian Blade. Great album. Love this album. Always go back to this. This has kind of got more like a bluesy sort of feel to it, and it's very similar to Mark Johnson's Bass Desires with Schofield and Frisell, but really, really good, and some great playing on here, and some of my favourite tracks on here. So we got Iron 9, 1881 / Research, Dugu, Kamaliba, Band of Brothers is one of my favourite tracks on here. Trinkle, Tinkle, Ugly Beauty, JLR, Do You, Bells of Contents, which is just 3 electric instruments, 2 electric guitars, and electric bass. The Thumb, Go Down Moses, and Tessori. It's a really good album this is, and I love it. So, here we are. It's all electric. It's kind of like an electric project for Patitucci. So there's no acoustic bass. It's just all electric, and got his new bass there, which is like a semi-hollow electric bass. So it's really good. So standout tracks for me are Band of Brothers, Bells of Countenance, Tessori, Go Down Moses, and one in 1881 / Research. Really good album this is. So those are the standout tracks for me. So there you have it, Brooklyn, another favourite album of mine, and as I said, big step up from Remembrance. Not hating on Remembrance, but I just think this one's a lot more stronger than the last album that came before. So there you have it, Brooklyn, the John Patitucci Electric Guitar Quartet. Fantastic. So we will come to the last album, and this is the last album that he's made to date, which came out in 2019, and this is Soul of the Bass. So this is a solo bass album with a few guest appearances from Nate Smith, his wife, and his daughters. This is a really good album. This is the album that I've been wanting John Patitucci to do for many, many years, and he finally came through, and this is fantastic. So let's have a look. Here we are. Yeah, good stuff here. So all the tracks are quite short, but they're very enjoyable. So standout tracks for me, I would say, are Truth, which has got his daughters singing, and we got Nate Smith on drums on Seeds of Change. But as I said, every track on here is just beautiful. Soul of the Bass, the title track, Seeds of Change, The Call, Mystery of the Soul, Morocco, Elvin, Earth Tones, Seeds of Change reprise, Alimande in D minor, Sarab, Trust, and Soul of the Bass, as I mentioned already. So a lot of good standout tracks on here. I love it. Soul of the Bass, and it's kind of got like an African Kenyan sort of cover, but it's a beautiful album. And if you like solo acoustic bass, I highly recommend you check this out. But it's not really just solo acoustic. There's some electric bass as well. But if you just like solo bass, highly recommended. This is the one for you. So the question I ask now is, what's your favourite John Patitucci album? What's the one that does it for you? It's a hard one, but it's not hard for me. I'm going with the first album. Can't beat it. This is John Patitucci at his absolute best on acoustic and electric bass. Doesn't get any better than this. This is John Patitucci, to me, at his peak. All of the other albums are fantastic. A couple of albums are a little bit on the weak side, but there's still some great tracks and some great playing. But for me, this is the one I go back to the most. The first album, to me, is an absolute classic and one that I always go back to the most. So there you have it, my all-time favourite John Patitucci album, the Selftitled. Doesn't get any better than that. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite John Patitucci album? Is it the first album, On the Corner, Sketchbook, Heart of the Bass, Another World, Mistra Weiner, One More Angel, Now, Imprints, Communion, Song Stories and Spirituals, Line by Line, Remembrance, Brooklyn, Soul of the Bass, or do you just like all of them? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again,